Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 138, and we are doing chapters 10, 11, and 12 of The Final Empire. Eliot, how are you?
Good. Good as always. Further and further into the story we go. I'm getting more and more intrigued, which which is a good thing.
Paul?
I'm doing great. We're getting to talk about a variety of stuff this week. We have our first, I guess, not as glum chapter where there's a little festival, a little ball.
There is a party. Do you guys have 2 words to summarize the whole episode? Paul?
My 2 words for this episode are espionage lifestyle.
Okay. Eliot?
On my end, I have gore and glamour.
Nice. Let's talk about The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. All right, Elliot, returning segment from last week. Would you like to summarize what we have read for episode 138?
You got it. So, quick summary for chapters 10 through 12. Some additional time has passed somewhere in here because there's a reference by one of the characters that it's been 12 weeks since the original planning meeting. So, I think we're at roughly 3 Earth months. I don't know how time passes on schedule. That's an interesting question. 12 weeks, whatever that means. Vin meets up with the crew at like a soup kitchen where they're recruiting rebels. And Kelsier gives this big speech, and Breeze does his soothing thing, and they recruit lots of people, and it goes really well. And Vin learns some things. On their way out of that, Kelsier kind of thinks a little bit or does some brainstorming on where all the atium is going. We've got some interesting thoughts on that. The crew reconvenes back at their, I think it's back at their hideout, but they kind of have another team meeting, and they decide that the recruiting is not going well enough. They're not getting enough people fast enough, so they need to expand. So they agree they're going to kind of divide up their forces and expand out to some other towns to recruit more people for their army to take over the world. And let's see. Vin pipes up with a suggestion at one point on how to infiltrate the ministry, because that's one of the other things they have to do. She suggests that they sneak a spy into the acolytes that are coming into the city to join the ministry. That doesn't really go very much further than that, but they throw out that idea. Then they get news that Vin's old lair, with the crew that she used to be with, has been hit by the ministry, and they go there and see a rather gruesome scene where all of that crew has been taken out, to say the least. And then Kelsier even tracks down the old leader Cayman and sees another gruesome scene where he has been killed in a very specific way to send a very specific message. After that, we turn away from some of the gore towards a bit of the glamour, which is Vin gets to attend her first ball as a noblewoman. She's super nervous going into it. You think she's going to fall apart as she's walking in, but then she kind of gets it together, realizes that she can hide underneath the persona that she's developed for herself that they've built, and so she does really well. And she gathers some information. She sees two people at the ball that I noted specifically. One is her father, apparently, who's
Yeah,
an obligator on the squad, and then the chapter 12 kind of ends with an interaction between her and Elend Venture, Lord Elend Venture, I believe, and that's it.
nice. Sounds good. Um, Several different things to talk about here. But let's talk about the recruiting first. So Vin has returned and talks to Breeze about soothing and rioting. Breeze is a soother. We've seen it before in some previous chapters. He soothes Vin into having Vin serve him a drink of wine, and just kind of he's very flippant about his soothing. He can do what he can soothe emotions, and then they use a team of soothers and rioters to during the recruiting meetings. Kelsier, it's all very staged. they have these ska rebellion people who are kind of interested that show up to this meeting. Kelsier walks in, he gives a speech, and they have this team of, all right, we're gonna send the blue apron serving girl in, and all the rioters in the room are gonna push on, like, yeah, you're really mad at the Lord Ruler in the Final Empire, and then we're gonna send the orange apron serving girl in, and then we're gonna soothe, like, no, it's okay, you don't need to be scared of the Final Empire, like that. It was all very coordinated, and they're really trying to dial into this Allomancy fueled recruiting. What did you guys think of this?
I had a similar question to the one that Vin directly asks, which is, does this method really work long term? You can make all these people feel all these emotions, and yeah, in the moment they're going to be like, "Yeah, I'm all in for this cause. I'm going to do it." What about a week from now?
Yeah,
What about they've joined up, they've shipped off to who knows where to go train as an army? Does this really like inspire them to join the cause, or does it wear off? And Breeze's answer was a little bit unconvincing to me. He mentioned something about, yes, the emotions wear off, obviously, but those emotions are tied to your memories, which that's absolutely true. I can think of examples where I felt very strong emotions and it imprints, very strongly in your memory. And so he kind of used that as justification of, you influence their emotions, which imprints on their memory, which sticks with them. I don't know if I fully bought it. I don't know if I'm fully bought into whether this is even a okay way to raise an army.
that was going to be one of
This
my
seems like
questions. Yeah,
full on cheating.
It is a wee bit manipulative, if you want to use the word, Um, I think it's almost kind of comical. Like I feel like this on a screen would be really funny to see, like
yeah.
especially trying to see like the people's reactions, or if they start to like wince with anger, or if they're like oddly relaxed. I don't know. It'd be kind of weird. And Elliot, that's a really good point. Also on the like, if you have strong emotions about something, it's going to kind of imprint on your memory more. You think of like times that you've been like really upset or just really happy or things like that. Like they're going to remember being there and being like so gung ho about this like cause and everything. And there's a lot of times that we get excited about just things, and then it kind of wears off, and you are kind of like, well, I know this is something that I want to do, but like, I used to be way more excited about it and stuff. But yeah, there does seem to be a recurring theme of getting people riled up and not worrying about the consequences of them making decisions in those like emotional highs. So
I do want to highlight the question: is this morally okay to do to this crowd? Because Breeze, if you ask this question to Breeze, Breeze is going to make the argument of, well, we're just using normal persuasion tactics, but just with that little bit of a plus, so it's fine. Because if you go to a normal rebellion meeting, how well you how well you talk and how well you inspire is going to directly correlate to how many people you get, and how good you are at arguing your case. And Breeze is just going to say, well, we just have that +1. That's all. That's all Allomancy is. Don't worry about it. We're just we got that little bit of an edge. So what do you guys think?
It's not a simple question, because part of me does see Breeze's argument there. It's kind of the thing of like, if you win an argument with someone because you're a better arguer, was that cheating? Like
Right.
if you are a more skilled negotiator and you win a better position in a negotiation, was that immoral? I don't think so. And so Breeze is basically trying to say, hey, I'm not doing anything, I'm not poisoning these people. I'm just really good at influencing their emotions. And so I'm using that skill to the utmost effect. That said, the dude is using magic to manipulate people into doing what he wants them to do. I don't think there's any getting around that.
Right.
And so we are firmly in the gray area for this, probably bordering on the, I don't know that this is okay.
yeah, I'll go ahead and make the step and say, like, I mean, given our like real world understanding I would say this is not okay. Uh, in this sense, like for the story, I'm not bothered at all. I'm like, okay, that's fine, you know. But like in a real world sense, it's like using powers that we think of. I think marketing is a good example. Like so many companies and people use like so many like subliminal like details to like influence your thoughts. There's the whole stuff with like colors and fast food like inducing like feelings of hunger. There's just
Mhm.
little details like the milk and eggs at every grocery store is at the back of the store, so you have to walk through everything, every
Yep.
ad
Yep.
to get the most common things so that on the way out maybe you'll buy more. There's just so many like subliminal things, but no one is there's like attempts to do that, but in like the real world, there's no unfair influence over you to make that decision. You can walk to the back of the store, grab your milk and eggs, check out, and spend. Well, now eggs are more expensive, but you can get your milk for
Bad
a dollar
example.
to couple dollars, and then leave, be on your way, not spend $50, $100 at your grocery store. Um, but like this is like you are there, and instead of you making your conscious decision to choose or not choose something, your emotions have been forcibly altered by some or forcibly nudged. Even the nudge is like still there, by someone um to join something that they want you to that they would have built numbers for, right? I think it's hard for me to think of a way that this is like not kind of crooked. But in my head, the more difficult question is like, do the ends justify the means? Like that whole debacle. I know we talked about that a lot in our other stories we've gone through, but it's like well, if we're getting them to join this good cause and overthrow the Lord Ruler who's bad, then isn't it good? And there's that whole question. But I don't know if I have a stance on that. I would probably lean still towards this is not a good choice, not a good way to bring people in, even if you believe it's for a good cause.
And I'm thinking along those exact same paths as well, and it's justifying the means and all that. But this scenario for me is a little bit different than some that we've talked about before. Before we were stuck in the whole, I'm going to justify these definitely bad things because in the long run there's a net good. In this situation, it's not necessarily objectively bad. You almost could argue like these people need to rise up and rebel against the oppressive forces that are holding them down. And so I could see a case for you're forcing them to do a good thing, or maybe to phrase it a different way, you're manipulating someone into doing something that is good for them
Yeah.
in a way, sort of, maybe.
I don't know. I don't know where I sit on it because I definitely do think Breeze has a point of I'm just better at manipulating people than everybody else. But also, if you look at it from the Ska's perspective, it's completely unfair for this random Ska recruit guy who's just walked in. He has no idea that he's being soothed and rioted, and then he signs up, and then that week later he's referring to emotions that were altered or even untrue um in his memory. So I don't know. Anything else from chapter 10? There's a couple other things, but what did you guys get?
There was a brief bit on ATM again. We've rambled on this a little bit last episode, but Kelsier pauses and wonders, where does all the ATM go? He knows somehow that there is X amount of ATM coming into the city from the mine, and that only I think he says about 10% of that gets distributed out to like the nobles or sold or something like that. So 90% of the ATM, and he even says 90% of the ATM mined over the last 1,000 years has been stored somewhere
Yeah,
or has not entered
circulation.
circulation. I have a theory about this. Are we far enough into this book for theory time yet?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, always.
Okay. I'm gonna chalk this one up on my imaginary chalkboard as my first big Mistborn theory. I think the ATM is not being stored anywhere. I think that they're going to Kelsier's whole plan here to break in, maybe kill the Lord Ruler, steal all the ATM. The twist is going to be they break in and there's nothing there. And the reason why is it's all being used for something. It's not being stored, it's being used for something. It's all powering, I don't know what yet, but something. That's the theory.
Are you
Yeah,
thinking that ties into you think you predicted that the Lord Ruler is like a figurehead, not actually like a powerful being?
Yes. I think this could very much play into my. I don't really have quite a theory yet on the Lord Ruler. I'm sure I'm going to at some point. Right now, I just have suspicions about the Lord Ruler. I have
Okay, that makes
suspicions that,
sense.
like, maybe the Lord Ruler is not the same Lord Ruler of 1,000 years ago. It's, they sneakily replace him every 30 years with a new person who he, wears a mask so he looks the same. Or we've already seen another person who is taking the place of someone else in Lord Renew. So maybe the Lord Ruler is just Lord renewing over and over, on and on ad infinitum. Maybe ATM is a part of that. Maybe they need ATM to power whatever magic they're using to keep the Lord Ruler propped up for forever. I don't know. I'm kind of spinning wild theories. I don't have enough facts to go off of right yet, but theory goes down. There is no ATM.
I don't remember what the answer is here, but I'm with you because the number that Kelsier talks about in this chapter is so high, 90% storage over 1,000 years, and that's somewhere. You've got to imagine that that's not correct or something else is happening. Um, with either it's
It's like
being shipped out somewhere or
warehouses full of this stuff.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And then why? At that point, why are you mining that much? Why are you not just slowing down the amount that
Yeah.
you're mining? Yeah. Anyway, there's something weird
Uh,
happening there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't actually think about the time frame. I was just like, ooh, it's a super scarce metal that nobody really has. So 90% of it. So he must have like a vault with it, but I didn't think about it being like actually like an impractical amount.
Right. So Kelsier and Sazed have a kind of a sidebar conversation about a religion. And Kelsier asks Sazed, is there a religion that includes the slaughter of noblemen as a holy duty? And I just wanted to highlight that phrase. Like, that tells a lot about Kelsier if that is his goal and if he could divert himself and say it's in support of a religion, then I'll follow that religion because that's all I want to do is the underlying uh comment there.
The references to killing noblemen has become one of those things with Kelsier that's like it's almost like one of those situations where the person is trying to make you think they're joking, but they're actually serious. Like they keep making references. Oh yeah, as long as I'm killing noblemen, then I'm good. And everyone's like, oh haha. Oh wait, no, that's actually what he means.
Right. Vin talks about Vin tells him that a lot of noblemen are gonna die if they start a house war between in Luthadel, and like as if that was be a consequence. And then Kelsier kind of just smiles and says, "Yeah, I can live with that." And that's the whole exchange. And Vin was expecting that to be like a counterpoint to what he was saying, and Kelsier's like, "No, no, that's a plus. That's a byproduct, not a consequence." Anything else from chapter 10? All right. So chapter 10 ends with one of Ham's soldiers walking in and saying, Cayman's lair was hit. There's nobody left in Cayman's lair. And so then chapter 11 immediately cuts to them walking into their old hideout, or Vin's old hideout. And the scene that we are described, if this was ever a visual adaptation, would be, if this was a truthful visual adaptation, would be very sickening to look at. There's some very gruesome detail in this description. What do you guys think of Cayman's lair here?
Definitely turn the stomach a little bit. reading and imagining what they're walking into. I mean, there was stuff in there. I'm not going to describe it all, but where it said like, there was vastly more surfaces covered with blood than not covered with blood.
Right.
You can't walk around without wading through it. And then yeah, the rest of the descriptions are just like, wow. Which of course you immediately jump to, what did this?
Yeah. Like this is way more than some Lord Ruler's soldiers' executions. This is something walked in here and ripped things apart.
Yeah. Which we've seen now what a Mistborn can do, or even just a steel pusher.
Yeah.
If if someone with steel pushing or iron pulling abilities walks into there with a bucket full of ball bearings, they can do a lot of damage if they've got, power behind it, which clearly they do. And it seems like all this is pointing at our steel inquisitors.
Yeah. That's Vin is in their head of, could an Inquisitor even do this? Like, I don't know what an Inquisitor can do, but it doesn't seem like one person could do all this, and how many people were here doing this. She finds Ulif. It's one of the first characters that we meet in chapter 1 with Vin, and Ulif is like one of her only friends, and Ulif is dead in here. Um, and then they're looking around for Cayman's body, but they don't find it. But then they also acknowledge that, well, Cayman wouldn't have actually been here because Cayman's been exiled from the lair by Kelsier's orders. So then they do go find Cayman's body, um, and Cayman was hunted independently, and he's dead in an alley, like, I don't know, across the city somewhere else.
That was that was another rather sickening scene. The description of how Cayman had been dispatched of, and Kelsier mentioned specifically that the method that they had killed him with, the hook that they had used to kill him, was a method of execution. I forget the exact wording. I probably should have looked it up. Was a method of execution saved for only the worst offenders of things, specifically like those who misuse allomancy.
Yeah.
And so that now Vin and Kelsier, because Vin follows Kelsier and sneaks up on him, they're both now wondering, and I'm wondering the same. Is that a message to Vin and Kelsier to say, we know what you are?
Yeah. It is a question of, is this to send a message, or did the person who executed Cayman actually believe that Cayman was a Mistborn or or a Misting?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because Kelsier mentioned something about he must have admitted something while being tortured, and
Yeah.
so then that question is, okay, did he admit something about Vin, or did he admit something about himself and protect Vin? So
This is a difficult thing, and I like the question you asked, Elliot, of like, is this a warning, or is this now they've seen what the risk they're running is, kind of thing. Right now I'm leaning, I feel like I'm leaning more towards the side of, this is just they're now discovering what the consequences are. I feel like this is a very elaborate thing to stage, and I'm feeling like if someone had enough knowledge and preparation to like do that, then they would have been able to like capture Vin or do something else, you know. Um, but that's a really good question I never thought about. This is a very like brutal and graphic scene. Um, so I guess not for the faint of heart, you know. But it's like, I don't know, it raises a lot of questions, which I think is really cool just as a story detail in our story thus far, because I know I keep comparing this to other Brandon Sanderson things we've read, but I feel like we're getting answers way at a much quicker rate. We're getting things explained to us. We're getting like we're understanding stuff. We're not holding on to questions for extremely long. There are obviously questions that are going to carry on through this book, through the future books and things. Um, but this is a question that raises a lot of. Sorry, this is a chapter that raises a lot of questions, um, which I'm excited to have because it gets my mind churning. We get some great predictions out of Eliot, that are all exactly spot on. By the way, every single one you have made and will make is going to be exactly spot
Perfect
on.
record.
I'm calling it now.
If you don't believe me, go back and watch all the rest of our episodes.
Yes.
Anything else for chapter 11?
Just a really brief mention that I actually found a little reassuring. Vin asks about the Inquisitors, and Kelsier mentions that there's only 20, or maybe like about 20, in the entire Final Empire. Which, when I read that, I was like, oh, okay. At least he doesn't have an entire army of these things. They seem incredibly powerful. I also realized that they refer to them not as people, but as things.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that
Mm-hmm.
in the book? They always say it. Look at what it did when they're talking about the Inquisitors. But at least there's only 20 of them. So if we do have to face a Inquisitor squad, that's going to be really bad. But at least it's not going to be 500.
Right. All right. Going into chapter 12, we have Vin's first encounter with noblemen and noblewomen. She shows up at the ball. There's all sorts of great visual descriptors of this cathedral that she shows up at. And it is hosted by House Venture, which is, we've been told, is the most influential house currently in Luthadel. So it's hosted by House Venture. She walks in, a couple different things happen. What did you guys think of the visual descriptors we get of the Keep Venture?
I want to chime in. I really loved it. So if you're hopping onto our podcast and kind of checking it out for the first time because you're reading Mistborn and you haven't heard us for Stormlight, I feel like my recurring theme has always been I just want the action, I just want the cool stuff. I don't, I of course enjoy world building and learning about the world, but like I'm here for the fun stuff, And this felt mildly like a more world building chapter. It's in such a fun manner of then is like a low ska and is going to this like nobleman's ball, like very regal, and so there's like really engaging to see what's going to happen. But as far as like the description here, I loved it. It felt like it felt like coming in after to a warm place after a really cold day kind of thing. It was like the depictions of everything is like stone stained by ash and ash falling everywhere and everything being like dirty and it's difficult to clean. And then it's just this like beautiful depiction of like walking in and like kind of a warm, jovial, lit atmosphere, and more of a finer thing, if you will. And it was a neat description that was really kind of like setting you at ease, especially after the traumatic scene of the chapter before. So I really enjoyed it.
I I learned something completely new reading the description of this place. As they're walking in, there's these cool descriptions of these. What I'm thinking of are like stained glass windows depicting these different scenes that
Yeah.
they're talking about, and they're backlit. These windows are by some lights that are behind them. And Vin is kind of like, whoa, those are cool. And I think it's Sazed pops up and is like, yeah, those are lime lights. They can heat up the quick lime to incredibly high temperatures and it glows. And I'm like, oh, what magic is this? And I start like, doing some research on this, like, oh, where's the investiture involved here? What's quicklime? Lo and behold, I found out after about 60 seconds of Google searching, this is absolutely a real thing in our world. And limelights, as they say, are not only exist today, I could go make one by getting some quicklime and heating it up really hot and it would glow. This is like super old technology. Like back in probably not Shakespeare's day, but back in the old days of theater, this is how they used to light theaters with these lime lights. They would heat up these little blocks of quicklime and they would glow brightly and you could light stuff with them. It's a real thing. I learned. Very cool.
Did you know that,
A
Paul?
little disappointing that it wasn't magic, but it was
I
cool.
mean,
How is
I
that
had heard
disappointing? Wait, hold on. You're like, dang it,
you
this
can
is
do this in real
real.
life.
Darn it. How is that disappointing?
It's way more cool than disappointing. Way cool because I learned something and I was like, wow, that's a real thing. But I was excited to learn about a new application of magic in a world I'm discovering, and lo and behold, it's just a boring old. Yeah, I could just go buy that at Home Depot.
That's actually hilarious. I think this is pretty cool. I didn't. I know I've heard of limelight. Like that's like a limelight. I don't know. That's just something that I've heard of. I couldn't have told you what it was. So it's nice to actually learn that. I'm glad you researched it. I was honestly googling that a second ago once you mentioned it as well, just to see. But yeah, it's kind of fascinating, and there is. It feels like so much more of that. This world feels so much more relatable and like to Earth. That I mean, other than the fact that it's raining ash all the time, and there's like spirits and mists, and aside from all that stuff, and people
Gelatinous
eating
blobs
metal.
going around,
Yes.
sucking up corpses. Yeah,
Yeah. Aside from that and the eating metals part, it's basically exactly like Earth. Jokes aside, it's neat to see something like that. So
I
I
agree.
had, I did not realize that. That's really cool.
What about who she encounters at the ball? Once she gets her wits about her, she eats her meal, and she picks her head up and sees someone. Elliot, you mentioned it earlier. Who'd she see?
Yeah, so she recognizes because she's seen him once before. Apparently, Vin has a really good memory. This has actually come up a couple times. She just like says, "Oh, let me memorize that," which
Is
reminded
it
me of another character
is it
elsewhere.
capitalized?
It is not capitalized here. I did notice that. I did look for that. It was not capitalized. She can memorize stuff fairly well. Maybe not quite as well as the other character we're referring to, but she knows the face of her father, which we've gotten vague references, I think mostly vague references to her lineage, and we know that her father is an obligator, and think it's said that her father does not even know she exists,
Yeah.
but he's there.
I have no memory of if this comes into play more or not, but I am curious to see where that goes and if she ever introduces herself to her father. And I mean, obviously, circumstances would have to be different, but if she were to do that, because um, we've been told that half bloods are not um, are frowned upon, even put to death. Um, so obviously circumstances would have to be different for her to introduce herself to him, but um
And I mean, we can even start to put things together there. It seems obvious to me at this point that Vin is an example of why half bloods
right,
are not allowed
right,
because of Mistborns. They don't want Ska becoming Mistborns. And so somehow that's tied to the nobleman bloodline. So Mistborns in the nobleman sector is fine. Mistborns in the Ska world, not fine. Therefore, kill all those people.
right. Several young men ask her to ask her to dance throughout the evening, and she's supposed to like memorize who and what house they're from, so she can tell Kelsier who's interested in Renew. And so she's kind of getting her bearings of the ball here. She notices something depicted in the stained glass. Did you guys catch one of the artworks that she talks about in the stained glass?
Is that the one about the deepness that she wonders about for a little while?
Yes, and I want to talk about the deepness here for a second because in the previous chapter, when they're looking for what's his face's body, Cayman's body, they pass a statue of the Lord Ruler, and it says it depicts the deepness about his feet. And there's the deepness is described next to his feet, and then in the stained glass window, it's there's also the deepness next to the Lord Ruler, and we've seen it, I don't know, 5 or 6 times now mentioned, and it's still not really explained. It's explained like as a fluid, like as like water or something like that. What are what are your guys' thoughts, and specifically Elliot's thoughts on the deepness and what that is, and what do you have any predictions on that?
Don't have a prediction on the deepness yet, because Vin is still asking all the same questions I am. Vin is
Yeah,
confused why it's depicted so kind of vaguely or formlessly. She's thinking like, if it was a monster, why not depict it as a monster? Why hide what it is? I don't know. I can think of a lot of reasons. I still have to solve my mystery about who the Lord Ruler is first, I
yeah,
think, before I can even go to, are these events of the past, this mythology, if you will, of of this place, is it true? What does it mean? I got to figure out who the Lord Ruler is first before I can start guessing about the deepness.
gotcha. And then at the end of the ball, she gets up and wanders around, says that at this point has been excused to go find out what he can find out at the servants' feast. Vin is alone. She walks up to this secluded balcony, and she finds who he eventually introduces himself as Elend. And it's not till the end of the chapter that we get a last name there. But he's reading a book, and I mentioned last episode about I'm about to have a criticism here of Brandon's writing. I mentioned last episode about how what really bothers me is when a character does something that I don't feel like that character would do. You've established a character and then they go do something that I don't feel is in line with that character. That really sticks out to me. Vin watches Elend and he's reading a book on this balcony and then has one line of inner dialogue that says, I'm offended that I don't get his attention immediately. I should have worn a better dress. Why is he not paying attention to me? And up until this point, he's established this character of Vin is perfectly happy that this guy would not pay any attention to her. That's what she would prefer. And then all of a sudden, she sat at this ball for an hour, and now she is disappointed that this guy is not paying attention to her. I'm kind of frustrated that Vin has an inner line of dialogue that says, "This guy is not paying attention to me." I don't think that's where her mind would be at personally. But what did you guys think of this scene?
Would you feel better about that if maybe our pacing had been a little more Stormlight style, and this was like the fifth ball that Finn had gone to, and she's gotten a little more comfortable and she's gotten used to like the young men all coming after her, and then all right, now she's been there a few times. Now she runs into Elend and she's offended he doesn't pay attention. Would that make you feel better? Is the shortened timeline playing into it maybe?
If it had been like repeated Elend encounters, maybe. Like, yes,
Okay.
I think that is true. That if she'd been to like 4 or 5 balls and constantly seen Elend, and still Elend had not paid any attention to her,
Mm-hmm.
maybe once she found out who it was and she's trying to talk to him to like get some information out of him, maybe that maybe I would agree there. But so yes, the shortened timeline probably does feed into it.
Yeah. I see what you mean about it seeming out of character because it threw me off because I imagined she would be thrilled that a
Right.
guy wasn't giving her attention. She was like, "Whoo! Finally, okay, I can just sit, chillax. No one's gonna ask me to dance. I don't have to do anything. That's exactly what I want to do right now." It does seem odd that that's her first reaction. I can also, on the flip side, see how it would affect her because it seems like every guy does pay attention and does care, and he doesn't. So
Right.
he's kind of like an odd thumb out, so it's noticeable for her. Um, yeah. So there is that aspect.
Elliot, what did you think of Elend?
I Now that I'm thinking about this, I think I bought into this reaction from Vin a little bit more than maybe Trevor you're talking about, because maybe this is actually partly because of a guess I made the very first instant this character showed up. I thought after we'd gotten, 5 words of description of him, that this could be Hoyd. And now that I think about it, I wonder if I was maybe thinking that because Vin seems to feel this kind of attraction to him.
Yeah.
And not necessarily a romantic one, but more of like you feel comfortable talking to this person.
Yeah.
Hoyd does that all the time, where people just talk to him, and sometimes they don't even know why. This felt like one of those moments here for Vin, and so up till about maybe a third of the way through the conversation, I was like, could this be our Hoyd appearance? By about halfway through, I was pretty convinced this was not Hoyd. The description doesn't really quite fit him. I think this is a much younger character than Hoyd is, at least the Hoyd that we're used to seeing,
Yeah.
which maybe I'm spoiling too much here, but I thought this might have been Hoyd. I fairly quickly convinced myself that it was not. I do, I do have a theory though about Elend with almost nothing to base it on.
Ooh, I like these ones.
But I've already thrown out one theory, so I might as well tack up another one. I think Elend is a Mistborn,
Okay.
and I have two reasons for this. One, it would just be fun. The one nobleman character that Vin like has a bit of a connection with, and she hates this world. She doesn't, she's not comfortable in it, but here's going to be that one person that she can connect with on some whatever level. Oh, shocker! Later on, he's a Mistborn. I can see that coming. But two, a little more like a little bit of evidence in this scene. Some of the things about Ellen's attitude seem to me to reflect some of the attitude that you often see with people that are in a position of power. There's an air of nonchalance that kind of comes with being more powerful than those are around you.
Aloof.
I wonder, yeah, I wonder if Elend is so aloof and doesn't really care because he kind of operates at a different level because he's a Mistborn. He's like,
Mm.
I don't really care about these balls. I care about, steel pushing and iron pulling and hopping around the city and doing fun stuff. I could see that playing into why he is acting the way he is because he's a Mistborn. That's the theory.
Okay. I really enjoy this ball sequence just because Vin finally gets to talk to someone that's not Kelsier. Like she's had a couple conversations with Dox and Breeze, but Vin is having this conversation and she's so far out of her depth, even as Lady Villette. Like, there's no way Lady Villette should be talking to Elend that we're told at the end of the chapter. Um, let alone Vin. Um, so that dynamic is really fun to explore. So I just enjoy this scene. Anything else?
I have some thoughts I wanted to share with you guys about Vin's character and maybe her character arc of where it might be going. And this is less of a theory and more of like I really hope this happens. This chapter with the ball it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot. We learned some things. It was cool. But there was a moment for me that was kind of heart-wrenching.
Mm.
And it was the moment where Vin is walking into the ball and she has that moment. I imagine her at like the top of the steps. She's climbed up the steps to this palace place. She's about to enter the door and she pauses. And she has that moment of like all the eyes turn to her and she's like, "Can I do this?" Here's what's going through her head as she's standing there. None of them could see Vin. They could only see the face she had put on, the face she wanted them to see. They saw Lady Valette. It was as if Vin weren't there, as if she were hiding right in front of their eyes. And suddenly, her tension began to retreat. It's kind of the moment where she gets up her courage to do it, but my heart is kind of broken for Vin. The fact that this is her safe place, the fact that the best possible thing for her as if is if she wasn't there. The best possible case is if no one can see her. Like the utter complete absolute zero confidence that Vin has in herself as herself is just ugh. Like I want to go cry because that's just such a she has no self-esteem in herself. And that is just really hard to read. And I really hope, I really, really badly want to see her go on a journey where she starts to believe that who she is someone worth being, that she gets to discover I matter and I can make a difference with who I am. I don't have to hide. I don't have to have a persona to hide behind. I'm important. That's where I want Vin to get to is have a moment where she understands I matter because she just has none of that right now and it's just it's sad. It's really sad.
I I think you did an excellent job of expressing that, Elliot. I definitely see what you mean, and it's kind of been a common theme so far of like not just Vin, she doesn't have like self-esteem. It's like she's never had the opportunity to. It's kind of always
Yeah.
make myself as small as possible so someone doesn't notice me and kill me kind of thing. And
Hmm.
and that's why I was so intrigued with this episode, sorry, this chapter, because we're taking that level of like socialization where not only do you like you have to think so lowly of yourself for like a survival reason that like how do you have a self-esteem, especially in a place like this of an echelon, especially around like probably a lot of really confident people in this like in this social setting, and that is like just really interesting. And so I also like always want to see that. I always want to see the insecure characters um grow to become really confident and secure and leaders, like not just like leading people, but like just exemplary, someone to look up to kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I always want that. So that was really well put.
Part of the equation here that I'll add to when I don't know which chapter it is, but I think maybe it's chapter 11 or 10 maybe. Um Kelsier and Vin are having a conversation about Marsh, and they go back and forth. Vin says, "Oh, so you guys have never gotten along?" And Kelsier's like, "Yeah, I don't really know why. We've never really seen eye to eye, but we really should. We agree on a lot of things. We just always seem to bicker about something." And so then Vin says, "Oh, so when does he beat you? Because that's what older brothers do, right? Like that's what her older brother did." And so she just assumes, "Oh, so." And then Kelsey says, "He never beat me, Vin. Like that's not what normal people do." And Vin doesn't believe him. And that's just the broken past that Vin is coming from. Is she just assumes that everyone is out to do damage to her at some point. There, it doesn't matter if it's a short term. I'm going to get along with this person. In the long term, they're going to betray me. So I should just take that from minute zero of, okay, I'm going to be let down. Anything I get from that point on is a bonus. And that's how she approaches all of her relationships at this point. So
And it's heartbreaking. I don't know if she'll be able to go on that arc in just this book. Maybe this is like her arc for the whole trilogy, and maybe this is something I need to look for at like book 3. But I hope that she gets to go on that journey. I will be very sad for her if she doesn't.
yeah. Anything else before we do a little bit of Stormlight stuff? All right, Stormlight spoilers incoming. Anyone want to chime in with something?
Okay.
I,
Oh, you go
I
ahead first, Elliot.
mine's pretty short and small. I didn't have too much Stormlight stuff to really kind of compare to in this chapter. The only thing I could think of was it seems like we have fairly consistent theme running now of class versus class. We see this a lot in Stormlight with light eyes and dark eyes, and even like the class system of the singers and the
Yeah.
listeners and
Yep.
all of them and the fused and all of that. It's even in Warbreaker with the kind of inner court of the gods and then the everybody else. And then here we have it again. This sort of inner circle of noblemen, the elite, and then the rabble, the crowd. I'm curious, and this is just an open-ended question. I'm curious why Brandon is making this such a core element of seemingly all his stories or most of his stories. It's
I'm glad you mentioned that because my point was similar as well. So in the last episode, Trevor mentioned like, oh, if this was a Stormlight book, and he was like, oh, I'm not going to make this a segment,
We're
and here I
supposed
am adding to
we're
that.
not making it a recurring segment.
That is true. We're not making a recurring segment, but I'm going to for this one. If this was if this was a Stormlight book, I'm thinking there would be, especially up until this point, there would be more distinct points of view from like a higher class and a lower class. Like we see that a lot in Stormlight right out of the gate of the Dark Eyes perspective with Kaladin and everyone, the Light Eyes perspective from both like the Dalinar crew and even Shallan somewhat. Um, Seeing the corruptedness, aka Sadius, and like the whole shebang. Um, in here, like we do get a decent bit of the perspective of like the Ska and kind of like the lower class, I guess. But really, it's not so much about the class or the system at hand in the Final Empire. We have our characters who I feel like we have a good perspective of life as our like Allomancer, like little thieving crew, but still not that much from that perspective. And then like a noble perspective, like I would assume that we are going to gain more perspective into that. That's kind of what this chapter does exactly. So this is not a knock on that at all. I'm just thinking Storma had such an emphasis on like bringing in so many perspectives and like really fleshing those out that this is more driven and not as much like seeing what everyone thinks about this. We're just seeing what Ven thinks when we
Yeah.
go through this, you know.
Something that I want to note as well, with what Eliot was saying, that there always seems to be these ska versus nobleman dynamics. It also appears to also be tied to the magic system, either intentionally or unintentionally by the culture. So, take on Roshar, dark eyes are seen lower than light eyes. They don't really know why, but it's figured out later that when you're a Knight Radiant, your eyes become light if they were darker, and that's where that comes from. That's where that caste system comes from. They don't know that in modern day Vorinism, but you can piece that together once Kaladin's eyes go light. You're like, oh, that's where the prejudice comes from, is because the light eyes are closer to the radiance.
Yeah.
And then in this one, for whatever reason, whether it's engineered or not, the noblemen have more Mistborn than the Ska do. Um, so I just wanted to point that out, that it seems to correlate consistently. And with Warbreaker, the gods have all the heightenings and all the breaths. They even feed off of, I think. The people with only one or a couple breaths in the lower system. So anyway, anything else?
Didn't see anything else. I'm sure there's stuff that I'm missing. There's got to be stuff in here that's like, oh, that's crossover, or that's rereader value stuff, but didn't pick up on too much in this set of chapters.
I wish I could say that you're right. I don't know if you are, though, because again, a little bit of meta commentary on when Brandon is writing this. He's way more scared of crossover and
Hmm.
putting things in that you're supposed to know ahead of time, like he is
Okay.
in Stormlight. So I don't know if there is
Right.
actually what you're looking for there. There might be later, but not at this point. Anything else? All right, let's reconvene next week. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Elliot.
Well.
Hasta luego.